The knife glinted in the fluorescent bank lights arcing toward the woman in the $3,000 suit. In that split second, Daniel Hayes, a construction worker with calloused hands and a daughter waiting at home, made a choice that would shatter everything he believed about human worth. The blade meant for CEO Olivia Grant found his flesh instead, but it was her words, not the steel, that would cut deepest. "You shouldn't have touched me," she said, as his blood stained the marble floor. "Welcome to a story about heroism, class, and the devastating truth that sometimes saving someone's life isn't enough to earn their respect. I invite you to follow this journey to the end, and comment your city below. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled." The morning started like any other Tuesday for Daniel Hayes. His alarm clock, a decade-old digital relic held together with duct tape, buzzed at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before it was supposed to. He'd been meaning to fix that for months, but between double shifts at the construction site and raising Emma alone, fixing broken clocks ranked somewhere below learning origami on his priority list. "Daddy," Emma's voice drifted from the doorway, small and sleepy. She stood there in her favorite pajamas, the ones with the dancing penguins, that were getting too small, but she refused to give up. "Morning sunshine," Daniel whispered, sitting up on the worn mattress that creaked with every movement. "You should be sleeping for another hour." "I heard your clock. It's loud." She patted across the floor in her mismatched socks, one purple, one striped, and climbed onto his lap. At 7 years old, she was getting almost too big for this, but Daniel would never be the one to say so. "Sorry, baby. I'll get a quieter one." Another promise he'd probably break, not from lack of wanting, but from lack of funds. The construction company had been late with paychecks again, third time in 2 months. Emma nestled against his chest, her hair tickling his chin. It smelled like the strawberry shampoo he'd bought on sale, the kind that promised salon quality, but came from the dollar store. "Are you working late again today?" The question hit him in the gut. Always did. "Not tonight, I promise. Just need to stop by the bank after my morning shift, cash my check, and I'll be home in time for dinner. We'll make those turkey dinosaurs you like. With the mashed potato volcano. With the biggest mashed potato volcano you've ever seen. Mount Vesuvius." She giggled at their old joke, the sound worth more than any paycheck. Daniel held her for another minute, memorizing the weight of her, the trust, and how she relaxed against him. These moments were becoming rare as she grew older, and he treasured each one like a miser with gold. After settling Emma back in bed, Daniel went through his morning routine with practiced efficiency. Shower in exactly 4 minutes to save on hot water. Skip breakfast, he'd grab something from the food truck at the construction site. Pack Emma's lunch with the care of a master chef peanut butter sandwich cut diagonally because triangles tasted better than rectangles, apple slices with a little lemon juice to keep them from browning a juice box, and a note on a napkin. Today's said, "You're braver than any superhero. Love, Dad." He drew a little cape on the stick figure. The bathroom mirror showed a man running on fumes. 34 years old, but looking 40, with premature lines carved by worry and weather. His hands were a geography of scars, each one a story of pipes. Fitted beams, lifted concrete poured. He'd been handsome once or so, Melissa had said, back before she decided that motherhood and marriage weren't for her. Back before she left him with a 6-month-old baby and a note that said, "I'm sorry. I can't do this." That was 7 years ago. 7 years of figuring it out as he went along of YouTube tutorials on how to braid hair of missing work, when Emma got sick of choosing between new shoes for her or fixing the car's transmission. 7 years of being both parents' breadwinner and trying to maintain some semblance of dignity in a world that seemed designed to strip it away dollar by dollar. By 6:30, he was in his truck, a 1998 Ford F-150 with 267,000 miles and a driver's door that only opened from the inside. The morning radio droned about traffic and weather, but Daniel's mind was on the bank visit he'd need to make. First National downtown, the one with the marble columns, and the tellers who looked at his work clothes like they carried diseases. But they also had the shortest lines during lunch hour, and time was money he didn't have. The construction site was already buzzing when he arrived. Miami's skyline was transforming glass and steel monuments to progress rising where old buildings once stood. Daniel was part of the crew working on a 40-story luxury condo homes that would sell for more money than he'd see in a lifetime. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was building palaces he'd never enter except through the service entrance. "Hayes, you're on beam work today," shouted Tony, the foreman, a good man who understood when Daniel needed to leave early for Emma's school events, but business was business. Martinez called in sick. Beam work meant heights. 30 floors up, walking on steel barely wider than his boot wine, trying to make you a statistic. It paid an extra $4 an hour hazard pay that wasn't nearly hazardous enough, but Daniel never turned it down. $4 an hour was the difference between generic and name brand cereal, between Emma feeling different from her classmates or fitting in. The morning passed in a blur of acetylene torches and rivets. Daniel's crew was good men and women who worked with their hands and backs, who understood that lunch was 30 minutes, not an hour, and that overtime wasn't a blessing but a necessity. They didn't talk much while working, but during break stories emerged. Luis's son had gotten into college first in the family. Maria's mother needed surgery. Everyone had someone depending on them. "You hear about that CEO woman?" asked Marcus, unwrapping a sandwich that looked as tired as he did. "Olivia Grant or something says she's going to revolutionize banking, make it accessible to everyone." "Rich people's version of accessible," Tony grunted. "Probably means you only need $100,000 minimum deposit instead of 200. The crew laughed, but it was bitter. They all knew the score. Banks were for storing other people's money, not theirs. Theirs went in if it went anywhere at all, and came right back out for rent, food, medicine, life. Daniel checked his phone, 11:43. If he left now, he could make it to the bank, cash his check, grab the groceries for dinner, and still pick Emma up from after-school care on time. The check in his wallet felt heavy, though it shouldn't. $1,847, after taxes, union dues, and every other deduction they could think of. 2 weeks of sweat strain and vertigo-inducing heights reduced to a piece of paper. "Heading out," he told Tony. "Bank?" "Yeah." "Be careful downtown. Heard there have been some robberies lately. Desperate people doing desperate things." Daniel nodded. Weren't they all desperate in their own ways? The drive downtown took him through Miami's stark contrasts. From the construction zone, through neighborhoods where bars covered windows, and hope seemed like a luxury item, past the invisible line, where suddenly cars got newer, stores got cleaner, and people walked differently, like they owned the air they breathed. First National stood at the heart of the financial district, all glass and importance, reflecting the Florida sun like a beacon of prosperity. Daniel parked 3 blocks away. Street parking was free if you knew where to look, and didn't mind walking. His work boots clicked against pavement that probably cost more per square foot than his monthly rent. People in suits flowed past him, rivers of purposeful movement, their eyes sliding over him like he was just another piece of urban furniture, visible but not worth seeing. The bank's air conditioning hit him like a wall of artificial winter. Everything inside was designed to impress and intimidate: marble floors, polished to mirror brightness, chandeliers that belonged in palaces, tellers behind bulletproof glass that seemed more about keeping the wrong people out than keeping anyone safe. Daniel got in line behind a woman arguing about international wire transfer fees and tried not to think about how the amount she was complaining about could feed Emma for a month. He'd been standing there for maybe 5 minutes, mind-wandering to dinner preparations, when the energy in the room changed. It was subtle at first, a tension like the air before lightning strikes. Daniel's construction site instincts kicked in, the same ones that told him when a beam was about to give or when equipment was about to fail. The revolving door spun, and 3 men entered. Wrong clothes for the setting heavy jackets in Miami heat. Wrong movement, too coordinated, too purposeful. Wrong eyes, scanning, calculating, predatory. Daniel's hand instinctively went to his phone to text the school that he might be late picking up Emma. But there wasn't time. "Everybody down, this is a robbery." The lead man's voice cracked like a whip. He pulled out a pistol, waving it in an arc that made everyone flinch. The other 2 spread out, one producing a sawed-off shotgun from under his coat, the other pulling out a knife that caught the light, like a promise of violence. Screams erupted. The sophisticated veneer of the bank shattered instantly. The woman who'd been arguing about wire transfers dropped to the floor, her designer purse spilling its contents across marble. A young teller, she couldn't have been more than 22, started crying behind her protective glass. "I said down." Daniel dropped to his knees, his mind racing. Emma. He had to survive this for Emma. Stay quiet. Stay invisible. Let them take what they wanted and leave. He'd learned long ago that heroes existed only in the movies and his daughter's bedtime stories. From his position on the floor, he could see the robbers moving with practiced efficiency. This wasn't their first time. The one with the pistol, the leader barked orders at the tellers. The one with the shotgun covered the customers, his weapon sweeping back and forth like a deadly pendulum. The third, the one with the knife, seemed to be the wild card, moving erratically, muttering to himself. "The vault!" the leader shouted. "Open the goddamn vault!" "I can't." The bank manager, a middle-aged man whose confidence had evaporated, stammered from behind the counter. "It's on a time lock. I don't have access until—" The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. The manager screamed, clutching his shoulder where the bullet had grazed him. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Wrong answer. Try again." That's when Daniel noticed her, the woman in the tailored suit. She'd been at one of the bank officers' desks when the robbers entered, probably discussing some loan worth more than Daniel would see in a lifetime. Now she was on the floor like everyone else, but there was something different about her. While others cowered, she was observing, her eyes sharp, calculating. She looked like someone used to being in control, and this loss of it was almost worse than the fear. The knife wielder noticed her too. Maybe it was the expensive suit, the Rolex glinting on her wrist, or just the way she held herself even while prone. He moved toward her with purpose. Well, look at this one. Fancy." Olivia Grant, though Daniel didn't know her name yet, stayed silent, but her jaw clenched. The robber crouched next to her, the knife dancing in his hand. "Bet you've never been on your knees for anyone, have you?" His voice was oil and malice. "Bet you think you're better than everyone here." "Take whatever you want," Olivia said, her voice steady despite the situation. "There's no need for violence." The robber laughed ugly and sharp. "No need, lady. Violence is all we got. It's the only thing that makes people like you notice people like us." He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her up to her knees. She gasped, but didn't cry out. The knife moved to her throat, close enough that Daniel could see her pulse jumping against the blade's edge. "Maybe we take you with us," the robber mused. "Bet your company would pay nice to get their princess back." "Let her go." The words came from Daniel before he could stop them. Every survival instinct screamed at him to shut up, but something deeper, something his father had taught him about standing up when it mattered, pushed the words out. The robber's attention snapped to him. "What did you say? Hard hat?" Daniel slowly raised his hands, showing he was no threat. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his voice stayed level, the same tone he used when talking Emma through nightmares. "I said let her go. You want money? Take money. You don't need to hurt anyone." "Maybe I want to hurt someone. Maybe that's the whole point." The robber released Olivia's hair, shoving her aside as he advanced on Daniel. The knife glinted, catching the light from those ridiculous chandeliers. Daniel had been in fights before, bar scraps in his younger days, confrontations at job sites. But this was different. This was life and death, with Emma's future hanging in the balance. "You want to be a hero construction boy? In your dirty boots? And your minimum wage courage?" Daniel saw the slight shift in weight, the tensing of shoulder muscles. The knife came fast, but construction work had given Daniel reflexes honed by years of dodging falling tools and swinging beams. He twisted the blade, slicing through air where his chest had been. But the robber was already adjusting, bringing the knife around in a backhanded arc. Daniel saw it happening like slow motion, the blade's trajectory, where it would hit the damage it would do. And behind the robber, he saw Olivia Grant trying to crawl away directly in the path of chaos. The math was simple and terrible. If Daniel dodged, the robber would pursue. Olivia would be caught in the middle. If Daniel didn't dodge— "Emma, forgive me," he thought, and stepped into the blade's path. The knife entered just below his ribs, a cold intrusion that became fire instantly. Daniel's grunt of pain was lost in the sudden eruption of shouts and movement. His hands closed on the robber's wrist, keeping the blade from going deeper, from twisting. "You stupid—" Daniel headbutted him. It was graceless, desperate, the kind of move you only saw in street fights, not action movies. The robber's nose exploded in blood, and he staggered back, releasing the knife. It stayed in Daniel's side, a terrible ornament to his sacrifice. Through the pain, Daniel stayed on his feet, staying between the robber and Olivia, between chaos and the other cowering customers. Blood was already soaking his shirt warm and terrifyingly plentiful. "Jake, stop playing and help with the safe." The leader's voice cut through the chaos. The robber Jake apparently wiped blood from his nose, glaring at Daniel with pure hatred. "This isn't over, hero." Sirens were wailing now, growing closer. Someone must have triggered a silent alarm, or maybe someone outside had called 911. The robbers heard it too. "We're leaving now." They moved toward the exit, but Jake turned back, pulling a second knife from his boot. This one was smaller, meant for throwing. His arm cocked back. Daniel saw it aimed not at him but at Olivia, who was helping the injured bank manager, her back turned. No time to warn her, no time for anything but motion. He threw himself forward despite the agony in his side, despite the blood loss making him dizzy. The throwing knife meant for Olivia's back hit his shoulder instead, spinning him around. He crashed to the marble floor, his blood painting abstract art on the pristine surface. The robbers fled the revolving door, spinning in their wake like a mockery of normalcy. For a moment the bank was silent, except for the sirens growing louder and Daniel's labored breathing. Then movement. Olivia Grant stood over him. Her expensive suit wrinkled a small cut on her cheek from where she'd hit the floor. Daniel looked up at her through vision already going gray at the edges, expecting. What? Gratitude, concern. Human connection born from shared trauma. Her eyes were cold as the bank's air conditioning. She looked at him, really looked at him, taking in his work clothes, his calloused hands now pressed against his wounds, the blood that was definitely going to stain the marble. "You shouldn't have touched me," she said, each word precise cutting. "I didn't ask for your help." The words hit harder than any knife. Daniel blinked, sure he'd misheard, sure the blood loss was affecting his comprehension. But no, her expression confirmed it. Disdain. Disgust, even as if his sacrifice had somehow sullied her, as if his blue-collar blood wasn't good enough to spill on her behalf. I saved... Daniel couldn't finish. The pain, both physical and something deeper, stole his words. Olivia stepped back as EMTs burst through the doors as if proximity to him might contaminate her further. "I had the situation under control." Someone else might have laughed at the absurdity, but Daniel was too busy trying to stay conscious, trying to process how saving someone's life could be the wrong thing. The EMTs swarmed around him, their voices urgent but professional. "2 wounds, significant blood loss. We need to move now." As they lifted him onto a gurney, Daniel heard other voices, saw phones raised filming. The modern world's reflex document. Everything, experience, nothing. He wondered what story those videos would tell. Would they see a hero or just another fool who didn't know his place? "Sir, stay with us. What's your name?" "Daniel. Hayes." Every word was effort now. "Okay, Daniel. You're going to be okay. Is there someone we should call?" "Emma." God, Emma. Who would pick her up from school? Who would make her dinner, help with homework, check for monsters under the bed? "My daughter... Emma, she's at..." The words dissolved into coughing blood, speckling his lips. The EMT squeezed his hand. "We'll take care of it. Just stay with us." As they wheeled him out, Daniel caught one last glimpse of Olivia Grant. She was already on her phone, probably calling lawyers or PR people or whatever rich people called when their lives were inconvenienced. She didn't look at him. It was like he'd already ceased to exist, just another piece of collateral damage in her important life. The ambulance doors closed and the siren wailed and Daniel Hayes bled, wondering how he'd explain to Emma why doing the right thing could feel so wrong. The Miami sun beat down on the ambulance as it raced through streets that didn't care about heroes or villains, just the endless push and pull of survival. In the back, a construction worker who'd built homes he'd never live in fought to stay conscious, to stay alive for a 7-year-old girl who still believed her father could save the world. The thing about saving people, Daniel thought as the morphine finally kicked in, is that sometimes they don't want to be saved. Sometimes they'd rather drown than take a hand that doesn't wear the right kind of watch, that doesn't have the right pedigree. Sometimes salvation comes with terms and conditions, fine print, written in blood, and class distinctions. But Emma was waiting. Emma, with her penguin pajamas and her absolute faith that her daddy was brave enough to fight off any monster. For her, he'd be a hero even if the rest of the world saw just another fool who bled on marble floors he had no business walking on. The emergency room was a blur of controlled chaos. Doctors and nurses moved with the precision of people who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. Daniel was a problem to be solved. Blood to be replaced, wounds to be closed, life to be preserved so they could move on to the next crisis. "He's lucky," he heard someone say. "Half an inch to the left and it would have hit something vital." Lucky. Daniel wanted to laugh but couldn't find the energy. Lucky was winning the lottery, not getting stabbed slightly less fatally than you might have been. Through the haze of medication and medical terminology, one thought remained crystal clear, Emma. Someone needed to pick her up, make her dinner, tell her everything was okay, even when nothing was. "My daughter," he managed to tell a nurse. "Please, someone needs to—" "We've contacted your emergency contact," the nurse assured him. "Mrs. Chen from next door. She's picking Emma up from school." Mrs. Chen, 68 years old, lived on Social Security and the vegetables she grew on her balcony. She'd watched Emma before when Daniel had to work late, always refusing payment, always insisting it was what neighbors did. Another person, the Olivia Grants of the world, would never notice another invisible hero in the economy of survival. Surgery took 3 hours. 3 hours of Emma not knowing where her father was, 3 hours of Daniel's blood being cleaned from bank marble, 3 hours of videos being uploaded to social media with titles like "Hero Construction Worker Saves Bank" and shocking robbery footage, "Man Risks Life for Strangers." When Daniel woke, the sun was setting, painting his hospital room in shades of amber and exhaustion. His side throbbed with each heartbeat. His shoulder screamed when he tried to move, but he was alive. That had to count for something. "Daddy!" The small voice cut through his medication fog better than any stimulant could. Emma stood in the doorway, Mrs. Chen's weathered hand on her shoulder. His daughter's eyes were red from crying, but she was trying to be brave. He could see it in the set of her jaw, the same expression she wore when she skinned her knee, but didn't want to seem like a baby. "Hey, sunshine," Daniel whispered, his throat dry as sandpaper. Emma broke free from Mrs. Chen and ran to his bed, stopping just short of throwing herself at him, remembering his injuries with the careful consideration children showed when they realized their parents were breakable. "Mrs. Chen said you were a hero," she said, her voice small. "She said you saved people." Daniel reached out with his good arm, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Mrs. Chen interjected, her accent thick with emotion. "Not anyone. Most people, they look away. They protect themselves. You—" She shook her head, unable to finish. Emma climbed carefully onto the bed's edge, her hand finding his. "Were you scared?" "Terrified," Daniel admitted. There was no point lying to her. Emma had lived through enough broken promises from her mother to deserve truth even when it was hard. But you did it anyway. Sometimes, baby, being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Emma nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness only children could bring to life lessons. Then, because she was still 7 and her world had been shaken, "Are we still having turkey dinosaurs for dinner?" Daniel laughed, then immediately regretted it as pain shot through his side. "Maybe tomorrow night. Tonight might be a hospital jello night." "I can make the dinosaurs," Mrs. Chen offered. "You have in your freezer." "Yes, I take Emma home, make dinner, help with homework." "Mrs. Chen, I can't ask you to—" "You don't ask, I offer. This is what we do, those of us who—" She paused, choosing words carefully in front of Emma. "Those of us who understand what it means to take care of each other." After they left Emma with a dozen kisses and promises to be good for Mrs. Chen, Daniel was alone with the steady beep of monitors and the muted sounds of hospital life beyond his door. He reached for the remote, flipping to the local news. His face filled the screen. It was surreal seeing himself from the bank's security cameras. The footage was grainy but clear enough to show the moment of impact his body taking the knife meant for Olivia Grant. The news anchor spoke in the grave tones reserved for stories that walk the line between tragedy and triumph. The hero construction worker has been identified as Daniel Hayes, a single father from Coral Gables. Sources say he acted without hesitation, saving several customers, including prominent CEO Olivia Grant, founder of Grant Financial Systems. They showed a photo of Olivia, professional headshot, perfect all confidence and capability. The anchor continued. Ms. Grant was unavailable for comment, but her company released a statement thanking law enforcement for their quick response. No mention of Daniel in her statement. No acknowledgement of the man who'd bled for her. It was as if he'd been edited from his own story. The news moved on to other stories, a corruption scandal, a feel-good piece about a dog rescue, but Daniel couldn't stop thinking about those words, "You shouldn't have touched me." A knock on the door interrupted his brooding. A man entered, expensive suit, expensive haircut, expensive everything. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Richard Thornton, legal counsel for Grant Financial Systems. If you're here to make sure I don't sue, you can save your breath. I don't want anything from her." Thornton's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "Actually, I'm here to deliver this." He placed an envelope on the bedside table. "Miss Grant wanted to ensure your medical expenses were covered." "I have insurance." Nevertheless, Thornton moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Mr. Hayes, what you did today was extraordinary. Funny, your boss seemed to think it was an inconvenience." Thornton's professional mask slipped slightly. "Ms. Grant is complicated. She's worked very hard to get where she is, and she's not comfortable with owing anyone anything." "She doesn't owe me anything." "No," Thornton agreed quietly. "But she owes you everything. Some people just don't know how to carry that weight." After he left, Daniel opened the envelope, a check for $50,000 and a brief note, "For your troubles. OG." For your troubles. Like he'd helped her carry groceries, not taken 2 knives meant for her. Daniel looked at the check for a long moment. $50,000. Enough to fix everything broken in his life. New truck. Better apartment college fund for Emma. All he had to do was cash it, except that this was how the world worked. Some people bled, others wrote checks, and everyone pretended it was equal. He was still staring at it when the door opened again. This time, it was unexpected. A young woman with a press badge and tired eyes that suggested she'd been chasing stories all day. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Sarah Martinez from the Miami Herald. I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk about what happened today." "There's nothing to talk about." "I disagree." She pulled up a chair without invitation, the gesture somehow not presumptuous but necessary. "I've covered a lot of these stories. Usually the hero narrative is clean, simple. But there's something different here. Something about the way Olivia Grant left that bank, the way she's avoiding questions." Daniel said nothing. Sarah leaned forward. "I talked to witnesses. Several of them heard what she said to you." "It doesn't matter what she said." "Doesn't it? You saved her life and she treated you like I was the help who'd overstepped." Daniel's voice was bitter now. "Like my blood on the floor was an embarrassment to her." Sarah pulled out her phone, showed him a video. It was shaky, filmed by someone hiding behind a counter, but the audio was clear. His sacrifice, her dismissal, all captured in digital clarity. "This is already going viral," Sarah said. "People are angry. They want to know why Olivia Grant's first instinct was to insult the man who saved her life. And you want me to what? Give you a quote, fuel the fire. I want you to tell your story, the real story, not the sanitized version her PR team is trying to spin." Daniel thought about Emma, about what lessons he wanted her to learn from this, about whether truth was worth more than a check that could change their lives. "You know what the real story is," he finally said. "The real story is that tomorrow I'll leave this hospital and go back to work if they'll let me, because I can't afford not to. The real story is my daughter will grow up knowing her dad did the right thing even when the world told him he was wrong for it. The real story is that there are thousands of people like me in this city, invisible, until we're useful, disposable once the danger passes." Sarah was typing rapidly on her phone, recording his words. "But here's what I want you to print," Daniel continued. "Olivia Grant doesn't owe me anything. Not thanks, not money, not recognition. You don't save someone because you want rewards. You do it because it's right. Because in that moment, you have the power to make a difference, and choosing not to is a kind of death itself. That's beautiful, Mr. Hayes, but don't you think she should at least acknowledge? What I think, Daniel interrupted, is that Olivia Grant has to live with being the kind of person who looks at sacrifice and sees inconvenience. I have to live with 2 knife wounds. Everyone makes their own choice about which is worse. Sarah studied him for a long moment. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone angrier, someone looking for their 15 minutes of fame or a payday. Daniel held up the check. I've got both right here if I want them. Will you cash it? He thought about Emma, about turkey dinosaurs and school supplies and all the things the money could buy. Then he thought about what it would cost, not in dollars, but in dignity, and the lesson it would teach his daughter about the price of integrity. The news cycle will move on in a day or two, he said, not answering directly. Some other story will take over, but I'll still be Emma Hayes' father. That's the only identity that matters. Sarah stood to leave, then turned back. For what it's worth, Mr. Hayes, I think your daughter is very lucky. No, Daniel corrected, looking at the ceiling tiles that probably cost more than his monthly salary. I'm the lucky one. I get to go home to someone who sees me as a hero, not because of what the news says, but because I make her turkey dinosaurs and check for monsters under the bed. Everything else, the banks, the CEOs, the checks, it's all just noise. Later that night, as the hospital settled into its quiet rhythm, Daniel made a decision. He folded the check carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Tomorrow he'd have someone return it to Olivia Grant's office. Not out of pride, he had too many bills for that luxury, but because some things shouldn't be bought or sold. The duty nurse came in for evening rounds, checking his bandages with practiced efficiency. You're that guy from the news, she said, trying to sound casual. The one who saved all those people. I'm just a guy who was at the bank. She adjusted his IV, her movements gentle. My husband works construction, pipeline installation. I know what it's like, the sacrifices you all make that nobody sees. Today, everybody saw. And tomorrow they'll forget. Maybe, but your little girl won't. My kids, they still talk about the time their dad helped pull a family from a car wreck 10 years ago. Heroes might fade from headlines, Mr. Hayes, but they live forever in the hearts of the people who love them. As she left, Daniel thought about that, about the different kinds of immortality people sought. Olivia Grant would build her financial empire, her name on buildings and business magazines, but Emma would remember her father's courage, would carry it forward into her own life, her own choices. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Chen had sent a photo. Emma at the kitchen table, face serious with concentration as she did homework, a plate of turkey dinosaurs beside her. The message read, "She says to tell you she's being brave like you." Daniel smiled through the pain. Let Olivia Grant have her cold marble palace. He had everything that mattered in a 7-year-old's determination to make him proud. The night deepened outside his window, Miami's lights creating false stars in the darkness. Somewhere out there, 3 robbers were running or hiding or planning their next crime. Somewhere, Olivia Grant was probably in her penthouse trying to control the narrative of a day that had spiraled beyond her manipulation. And somewhere, a little girl was falling asleep knowing her father was a hero, not because anyone else said so, but because he'd proven that courage wasn't about net worth or social standing. It was about standing up when it mattered, even if the person you're protecting doesn't think you're worthy of touching them. Daniel closed his eyes, letting the medication pull him towards sleep. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, medical bills, despite Olivia's check-missed work, the long recovery ahead. But tonight he'd stood between chaos and order, between violence and victims, and he'd chosen to be the shield rather than just another bystander. You shouldn't have touched me, Olivia had said. Maybe not, Daniel thought. But given the chance, he'd do it again. Not for her, but for Emma, for Mrs. Chen, for all the invisible people who deserved to know that someone would stand up for them, that their lives had value beyond their bank accounts or social status. The monitor beeped steadily, a mechanical heartbeat in the darkness. Daniel Hayes, construction worker, single father, and reluctant hero, drifted off to sleep knowing that tomorrow's headlines would forget him. But the only headline that mattered, the one in his daughter's heart, would remember forever. The morning arrived with a dull ache that seemed to radiate from every nerve ending in Daniel's body. The hospital room was already bright with Florida sunshine when Dr. Patel arrived for morning rounds, her expression professionally neutral as she examined his charts. "The good news is that you're healing well," she said, checking the dressing on his side. "The bad news is you're going to need at least 2 weeks before you can even think about returning to physical labor." 2 weeks. Daniel did the math automatically. 2 weeks without pay meant the rent would be late. The electric bill would slide, and Emma's field trip money would have to come from somewhere that didn't exist. "I need to get back sooner," he said, trying to sit up straighter despite the lightning bolt of pain it sent through his torso. "Mr. Hayes, you took 2 significant knife wounds. Your body needs time to heal. Returning to construction work too soon could cause permanent damage." Permanent damage versus immediate poverty. The kind of choice that people like Dr. Patel with her medical degree and steady salary probably never had to make. "When can I leave the hospital?" "Tomorrow, if someone can help you at home. You'll need assistance with basic tasks for at least a few days." After she left, Daniel stared at his phone, scrolling through the contacts list that was embarrassingly short. Most of his old friends had drifted away after Melissa left, uncomfortable with the sudden single fatherhood that had consumed his life. His parents were gone: dad from a heart attack 5 years ago, mom from cancer the year before Emma was born. There was no one except Mrs. Chen, and he'd already asked too much of her. The phone rang, startling him. The number was unfamiliar. "Mr. Hayes, this is Patricia Winters from Channel 7 News. We'd love to have you on our morning show to talk about your heroic actions." Daniel hung up. The phone immediately rang again. Different number, same request. Then another, and another. By the 10th call, he turned the phone off entirely. The door opened and Tony walked in, still in his work clothes, concrete dust in his hair. "Jesus, Danny," his foreman said, taking in the bandages and IV lines. "When they said you were in the hospital, I thought maybe you'd fallen off scaffolding or something. Not this." "Yeah, well, I always was an overachiever." Tony pulled up a chair, his weathered face serious. The crew took up a collection. He placed an envelope on the bedside table. "It's not much, but it should help with the bills while you're out." Daniel's throat tightened. "Tony, they can't afford—" "Nobody can afford anything, Danny. That's why we look out for each other." Tony's voice was gruff with emotion he was trying to hide. "Besides, Luis says you're a hero now. Says his kids saw you on TikTok." "I'm not a hero. You just saved a bunch of rich folks who probably never gave you a second thought before yesterday." Tony's expression darkened. "I saw what that Grant woman said to you. Maria showed me the video. It doesn't matter." "Like hell it doesn't." Tony stood pacing to the window. "You know what pisses me off most? Tomorrow she'll still be rich. Tomorrow, we'll still be building towers we'll never live in. Tomorrow, nothing changes except you got 2 holes in you and she gets to pretend you don't exist." "I didn't do it for her." "I know you didn't. That's what makes you better than all of them." Tony turned back from the window. "The job will be there when you're ready. Don't come back too soon. We need you whole, not trying to be some tough guy who works through the pain." After Tony left, Daniel opened the envelope. $340 in small bills, 20s, 10s, 5s. He could picture each crew member digging into their wallets, giving what they could spare, and probably some they couldn't. It was more meaningful than Olivia Grant's $50,000 check could ever be. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, a woman in her 50s, well-dressed, but not ostentatiously so, with kind eyes behind designer glasses. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Helen Morrison. I was at the bank yesterday." Daniel didn't recognize her, but then again, his focus had been somewhat narrow during the robbery. "I was behind the teller counter when it happened." She continued, sitting down without invitation, but somehow making it feel natural rather than presumptuous. "You saved my life. When that man with the knife was coming toward us, you stopped him. I wasn't trying to save anyone specifically, just trying to stop things from getting worse. But you did save us. Me, the tellers, even Ms. Grant, though she seems determined to pretend otherwise." Helen's expression hardened slightly. "I've worked in banking for 30 years, Mr. Hayes. I've seen all types. But what she said to you, that was something else. People react differently to trauma." Helen laughed, but it was bitter. "That wasn't trauma talking. That was privilege so deep she can't even see it anymore. Do you know who Olivia Grant really is?" Daniel shook his head. "Old money. Her grandfather built half the hotels on South Beach. Her father turned that into a financial empire. She likes to play the self-made CEO, but she started on third base and acts like she hit a triple. It doesn't matter who she is, doesn't it? You took a knife for someone who sees you as beneath her notice. That matters. Helen reached into her purse, pulling out a business card. I run a small credit union in Coral Gables. We're always looking for security consultants, people who understand real-world threats, not just theory. The pay isn't amazing, but it's steady, and you wouldn't be destroying your body on construction sites. I don't know anything about bank security. You knew enough to spot those robbers before they announced themselves. Tony told me, yes, I know, Tony. His wife banks with us. He said you have instincts that you can read a situation better than anyone he knows. Daniel looked at the card. It was a lifeline he hadn't expected from a source he hadn't imagined. Think about it, Helen said, standing to leave. And Mr. Hayes, some of us at that bank yesterday, we see you. We know what you sacrificed. Don't let one woman's coldness diminish what you did. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of medical checks and phone calls Daniel didn't answer. As evening approached, he heard familiar voices in the hallway, Emma's high, excited tones mixed with Mrs. Chen's softer cadence. Emma burst through the door carrying a poster board that she'd clearly spent hours on. In uneven but determined letters, it read, "My dad is a hero," with drawings of stick figures' hearts, and what appeared to be a dinosaur wearing a cape. "I made it for your room," she announced proudly. "So when you wake up, you remember." It's perfect sunshine. Mrs. Chen set down a container that smelled like heaven, her homemade soup that could cure anything short of bullet wounds. "The reporters, they came to the building," Mrs. Chen said quietly, while Emma was distracted arranging get-well cards from her classmates on the windowsill, like vultures asking questions, wanting to know about you. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this." No sorry. I told them nothing. Your business is your business." She ladled soup into a bowl, the steam carrying scents of ginger and comfort. "But Daniel, the people want to know you. Not the story, but you. They want a narrative. Hero saves ungrateful rich woman. Class warfare with a happy ending or a tragic one, depending on their politics." Mrs. Chen studied him with eyes that had seen revolution, immigration, and more hardship than most people could imagine. "You think too much about what they want. What do you want?" "I want to go back to before yesterday, when I was just a guy trying to raise his daughter and make ends meet. That man still exists. He just has new scars now." Emma climbed onto the bed, carefully curling against his good side. "Daddy, are you scared?" "Of what baby?" "The bad men. What if they come back?" Daniel pulled her closer, ignoring the protest from his wounds. "They won't come back. And even if they did, there are good people everywhere who would stop them. Like you stopped them. Like lots of people would." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Jessica's mom said you were stupid to save someone who didn't appreciate it." Mrs. Chen made a disapproving noise. "Jessica's mother should mind her own business." "What do you think?" Daniel asked Emma. His daughter's face scrunched in concentration. I think doing the right thing isn't about whether someone says thank you. It's about being able to look in the mirror. 7 years old and already wiser than most adults. Daniel kissed the top of her head, breathing in her strawberry shampoo smell. That's exactly right. Later, after Emma and Mrs. Chen had left with promises to return in the morning, Daniel found himself unable to sleep. The hospital at night had its own rhythm. Distant footsteps, muffled conversations, the occasional cry of pain or call for help. It was almost peaceful in its consistency. His phone turned back on against his better judgment showed 57 missed calls and twice as many text messages. One stood out not from a reporter or a producer, but from a number with no name attached. "This is Olivia. We need to talk." No apology, no context, just a demand disguised as a statement. Daniel deleted it without responding. The news was playing on the TV at low volume. He saw his face again, the bank footage on endless loop. But now there were talking heads, analyzing, pontificating, turning his split-second decision into a commentary on everything from income inequality to toxic masculinity to the death of civility. "What we're seeing here," one particularly pompous commentator intoned, "is the collision of two Americas, The working class hero and the ivory tower elite. Daniel changed the channel. On the next station, a different angle, sources close to Olivia Grant say she was in shock that her words were taken out of context. Another channel. The question we should be asking is why Daniel Hayes felt the need to insert himself into a situation that trained professionals should have handled. He turned the TV off. Everyone had an opinion about a moment they hadn't lived, a choice they hadn't had to make. Tomorrow there would be think pieces and hot takes turning his blood into content, his sacrifice into clickbait. A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. He expected another reporter who'd somehow gotten past security, but instead a young man in a security guard uniform entered. "Mr. Hayes, I'm James. I was working security at the bank yesterday." The shame in his voice was palpable. "I hid," James continued, the words tumbling out like a confession. "When they came in, I hid behind a desk. I had all this training, this responsibility, and I hid while a customer did what I should have done." "You did the smart thing." "No, I did the coward's thing." James was crying now, silent tears rolling down his face. "I keep seeing it over and over, you stepping in front of that knife while I cowered like a child." "How old are you, James?" 22. Younger than Daniel had thought. Probably his first real job, definitely his first real crisis. "You want to know what I thought when I saw that knife coming?" Daniel asked. "What? I thought, this is stupid. I'm going to die for nothing, leave my daughter an orphan, and for what? But my body moved before my brain could stop it. That's not heroism, James. That's instinct, maybe stupidity. But you still did it. And if I had to do it again, knowing what I know now, knowing how she'd react, I don't know. That's the truth. Nobody wants to hear. Heroes in movies don't hesitate. Real people do. You hesitated and chose to live. I hesitated and chose something else. Neither of us is wrong." James wiped his eyes. "They fired me. The bank. Said I failed in my duties." Of course they did. Someone had to be the scapegoat, and it couldn't be the system that put one young guard in charge of a bank's worth of money and lives. "You know what you should do," Daniel said. "You should talk to Helen Morrison. She runs a credit union in Coral Gables. Tell her I sent you. Maybe she needs someone who's learned that real courage isn't about having a gun or a badge." "Why would you help me? I failed you." "You didn't fail me. You survived. Sometimes that's its own kind of courage." After James left, Daniel finally dozed off, but his dreams were full of knives and marble floors and cold eyes that looked through him like he was made of glass. He woke to commotion in the hallway, raised voices, sounds of a scuffle. The door burst open and a man stumbled in, disheveled drunk, or high definitely unstable. "You're him," the man said, pointing an unsteady finger. "The hero, the one all over the news." Daniel's hand moved to the call button, but the man wasn't threatening, just lost. "My son died in Afghanistan," the man continued, swaying slightly. "Saved 3 guys in his unit? You know what he got. A medal his mother can't look at, and a grave I visit drunk because sober hurts too much." "I'm sorry for your loss. But you saved some rich bitch who spits on you and everyone cares. Everyone's talking about it. Where were the cameras when my boy died? Where were the think pieces about his sacrifice?" Security arrived 2 guards who handled the man gently but firmly. "It's okay," Daniel told them. "He's not causing trouble." "My son was worth 100 of her, so," the man said as they led him away. "But he's dead and she's alive and you're a hero and none of it makes any goddamn sense." The room felt heavier after he left. Daniel understood the man's rage, the unfairness of who gets mourned and who gets forgotten, who gets called a hero and who dies anonymously in a desert half a world away. His phone rang. Tony again. "You see the news this morning?" "No." "Olivia Grant's company stock is tanking. Apparently being an ungrateful ice queen is bad for business. Shareholders are calling for her to step down." Daniel felt no satisfaction at the news. Her fall wouldn't heal his wounds or pay his bills. It was just another circus act in a show he never auditioned for. "There's something else," Tony continued. "Some group online, they started a GoFundMe for you. It's already at 30,000. "What?" "People are pissed, Danny. They see themselves in you and her and every boss who ever looked through them. They're donating $5, $10 at a time, saying it's about showing that regular people support each other. $30,000 from strangers who saw him as a symbol of their own struggles. It felt different from Olivia's check earned rather than given solidarity, rather than charity. I don't know if I can accept it. Why not? You think those people don't want to help. You think their $5 means less than her $50,000. It wasn't about the amount. It was about what accepting it meant, becoming forever the man who got stabbed and disrespected, turning his worst day into his identity.
I need to think about it. Well, don't think too long. Emma deserves a dad who can accept help as easily as he gives it. After Tony hung up, Daniel lay back staring at the ceiling. Through his window, Miami churned on indifferent to individual dramas. The sun was rising higher, painting the city in shades of gold and possibility. Somewhere out there, Olivia Grant was dealing with the consequences of her words. Somewhere 3 robbers were hiding or running or planning their next crime. Somewhere Emma was getting ready for school, probably wearing the outfit she'd picked out the night before, the one that made her feel brave. A nurse came in to check his vitals. She was new, someone he hadn't seen before. "Oh my goodness," she said, recognizing him. "You're the hero from the bank." "I'm just Daniel." "My daughter's class is talking about you. Her teacher is using what happened as a lesson about standing up for others." "And what lesson is she teaching about what happens after you stand up?" The nurse paused in her work. "That sometimes doing the right thing hurts, but that doesn't make it less right." "Does she teach them about the medical bills? The missed work? The people who think you should have minded your own business?" "No," the nurse admitted. "But maybe she should. Maybe kids need to know that heroes pay prices that don't make the news." Daniel thought about Emma's poster, "My Dad is a Hero." She didn't need to know about prices, not yet. Let her believe a little longer that good deeds were their own reward, that courage was always recognized, that the world was fair enough to honor sacrifice. The phone rang again. This time it was a number he recognized, Emma's school. "Mr. Hayes, this is Principal Rodriguez. I'm calling to check on you and to let you know we've arranged for Emma to have lunch provided free for the rest of the year. The PTA insisted." "That's not necessary." "Mr. Hayes, with all due respect, shut up and let people help you. You've shown our children what courage looks like. Let us show them what community looks like." Community. The word sat strange in his mouth, foreign, after years of self-reliance born from necessity. But maybe that was changing. Maybe getting stabbed in a bank was the price of admission to something he hadn't known he was missing. "Thank you," he managed. "There's one more thing. Channel 12 wants to film Emma's class talking about heroes, real ones, not comic book characters. They want to feature you. I told them I'd ask, but that your privacy comes first." "No filming, Emma." "I thought you'd say that." "Good. She's a special kid, Mr. Hayes. She told her class this morning that heroes don't do things for cameras. They do them because someone has to." After the principal hung up, Daniel felt the exhaustion settling into his bones. Not just physical, though. That was there a deep ache that painkillers couldn't quite reach, but emotional. He'd spent his entire adult life trying to be invisible, to move through the world without causing ripples. Now he was the stone thrown into the pond, and the ripples were spreading beyond his control. His phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number he now knew was Olivia. "The offer stands. We need to talk. There are things you don't understand." He almost deleted it again, but something made him respond. "I understand enough. You showed me who you are. Believe you." The response came immediately. "You showed me who I am too. I didn't like what I saw." Daniel stared at the message. It wasn't an apology, not quite, but it was something. A crack in the armor, maybe. Or maybe just another manipulation from someone used to getting what she wanted. He didn't respond. Some conversations were better left unfinished, some bridges better left burned. Tomorrow, he would leave this hospital and try to rebuild a life that had been ordinary in all the best ways. Tomorrow, Emma would need lunch made and homework help and bedtime stories. Tomorrow, the world would move on to other heroes and villains, other sacrifices and betrayals. But tonight, in a hospital bed paid for by the blood he'd shed for strangers, Daniel Hayes was exactly what his daughter's poster said, a hero. Not because the news said so, not because strangers donated money, not because he'd saved lives. He was a hero because tomorrow he would wake up despite the pain, despite the unfairness,
despite the cold words of a woman he'd bled for, and he would make Emma breakfast. He would check her homework. He would be her father. That was the heroism. Nobody filmed the daily decision to keep going, to keep caring, to keep believing that standing up mattered even when the world knocked you down for it. The sun set over Miami, painting the hospital room in shades of ending. But endings Daniel had learned were just beginnings waiting for their turn. Tomorrow would begin again, and he would meet it standing, even if he had to lean on others to do it. The door opened one more time. Dr. Patel entered with discharge papers. "We're releasing you tomorrow morning. You'll need to follow up with your primary care physician. Keep the wounds clean, no lifting anything heavier than 10 pounds. I understand. Because men like you and I've treated plenty, you think you're invincible. You think pain is just weakness, leaving the body, or some other nonsense. But these wounds, Mr. Hayes, they're serious. Push too hard, too fast, and you could end up back here. Or worse. I have a daughter to take care of. And she needs you alive and healing, not dead from stubbornness." After she left, Daniel let himself feel the full weight of it all. The fear he'd pushed down when the knife entered his body. The rage at Olivia's dismissal. The worry about money, about Emma, about a future that seemed suddenly less certain than his already uncertain life had been. But also surprisingly gratitude for Mrs. Chen and her soup, for Tony and the crew's envelope of small bills, for Helen Morrison and her job offer, for the strangers who saw something in his story worth supporting, for Emma, always for Emma, who made every sacrifice worth it, simply by existing. The night nurse came in for final rounds, adjusting his IV, checking his vitals with practiced efficiency. "Try to get some sleep, Mr. Hayes. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." Tomorrow. The first day of whatever came after being a reluctant hero. The first day of explaining to Emma why he couldn't pick her up or play their usual games. The first day of navigating a world that had seen him bleed and had opinions about what that blood meant. But also the first day of something else, something harder to name. A connection to others he hadn't felt before. A visibility that was uncomfortable but maybe necessary. A story that wasn't his alone anymore, but belonged to everyone who'd ever been overlooked, undervalued, dismissed. Daniel closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to remember. Not the violence or the fear, but the moment of choice. The split second when he could have stayed down, stayed safe, stayed invisible. The moment when something deeper than thought had lifted him up, pushed him forward, made him matter in a way that paychecks and social status never could. Tomorrow he would go home. Tomorrow the story would continue, complicated and messy and human. But tonight, in the space between who he'd been and who he was becoming, Daniel Hayes rested in the simple truth that he'd stood up when it mattered, even if the person he'd stood up for wished he hadn't, even if the world couldn't agree on what it meant, even if the only person who really needed to understand was a 7-year-old girl who still believed in heroes. The monitor beeped steadily in the darkness, counting out the rhythm of a life that had been ordinary until it wasn't, that had been invisible until everyone was watching, that had been about survival, until it became about something more. Something worth bleeding for even if the blood wasn't appreciated. Something worth sacrificing for even if the sacrifice was dismissed. Something worth being even if being it hurt more than any knife ever could. The discharge papers felt heavier than they should have in Daniel's hands as he signed them. The next morning, each signature, a commitment to return to a world that had shifted beneath his feet. The hospital lobby was mercifully empty at 7 a.m., just a few bleary-eyed visitors clutching coffee and the overnight staff changing shifts. Mrs. Chen waited by the entrance with Emma, who bounced on her toes despite the early hour. "Daddy!" Emma ran to him but stopped short, remembering his injuries. Her restraint broke Daniel's heart a little. 7-year-olds shouldn't have to be careful around their fathers. "It's okay, sunshine. Gentle hug." She wrapped her arms around his waist with the delicacy of handling spun glass. He could feel her trembling slightly, the brave face she'd been wearing for 2 days finally cracking. "I was scared," she whispered into his shirt. "Me too, baby. Me too." Mrs. Chen had brought her ancient Honda Civic, the one that rattled when it hit 40 miles per hour, but somehow kept running year after year, much like Mrs. Chen herself. The ride home was quiet except for Emma's occasional observations about things that had happened while he was gone. A new kid in class, a bird that had built a nest outside their window, how Mrs. Chen had taught her to make spring rolls. Their apartment building looked smaller somehow, shabbier in the morning light. Daniel had never noticed how the paint peeled around the entrance or how the security door hung slightly crooked. Maybe nearly dying gave you new eyes for the life you'd been living. Mr. Hayes? Mr. Hayes? Before he could react, reporters materialized from behind parked cars from the coffee shop across the street, like predators who'd been waiting for prey. Cameras flashed microphones thrust forward, voices overlapping in a cacophony of questions. How does it feel to be home? Have you heard from Olivia Grant? Will you be pursuing legal action? What do you say to people calling you a symbol of working-class heroism? Daniel pulled Emma closer, feeling her shrink against him. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, all 5 feet of her radiating a fury that made seasoned reporters step back. You vultures get away. This is private property. There is child here. Ma'am, the public has a right to. The public has right to nothing. This man just out of hospital. You have no shame. Daniel used the distraction to guide Emma through the gauntlet, his body screaming with each step, but his face showing nothing. Inside the building's dim hallway, he could finally breathe. Are those people going to stay here? Emma asked, peering through the small window in the door. Not for long, baby. We're not that interesting. But even as he said it, Daniel wondered if it was true. The story had taken on a life of its own, becoming about more than just a bank robbery. It had become a mirror that showed people things they didn't want to see about their society, their values themselves. The apartment felt like a sanctuary after the chaos outside. Everything exactly as he'd left it 3 days ago. Emma's cereal bowl in the sink, his work boots by the door, the stack of overdue bills on the counter he'd meant to deal with after cashing his check. I'll make tea, Mrs. Chen announced, moving to the kitchen with the confidence of someone who knew where everything was. She'd been in their lives long enough to be family the grandmother Emma had never had. Daniel lowered himself onto the couch, the movement sending sharp reminders of his wounds through his body. Emma curled up beside him, careful not to lean on his injured side. Daddy, why did that lady say that mean thing to you? He'd known this question was coming, had been dreading it. How did you explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes people could be cruel even when you saved their life? That class and money could build walls higher than any physical barrier. Sometimes sunshine when people are scared or confused, they say things they don't mean. But you saved her. I did. And she wasn't happy. I think she didn't know how to be happy about it. Sometimes when someone helps us, it makes us feel like we couldn't help ourselves. And for some people, that's a hard feeling. Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all difficult questions. That's stupid. Despite everything, Daniel laughed. Yeah, baby, it kind of is. Mrs. Chen returned with tea and the morning paper. Daniel's face stared back from the front page beneath the headline, Hero or Victim, the Man Who Saved the Ungrateful Rich. You don't read that garbage, Mrs. Chen said, but it was too late. Daniel had already seen the editorial, the opinion pieces, his life dissected by people who'd never met him. His phone rang. Tony. Danny, you see outside your building? It's a circus. You want me to come over, help clear them out? No, but thanks. How's the site? Forget the site. You need to see something. Channel 7 right now. Daniel reached for the remote, flipping to the local news. His blood went cold. Olivia Grant filled the screen, sitting in what looked like a professionally lit studio, her appearance immaculate as always. But something was different. The cold perfection had cracks in it, shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, a tension in her shoulders that her expensive jacket couldn't disguise. And that's why I'm here today, she was saying, to set the record straight about what happened at First National Bank. The interviewer, a woman with perfectly styled hair and an expression of practiced sympathy, leaned forward. Ms. Grant, the video clearly shows you telling Mr. Hayes, and I quote, "You shouldn't have touched me. How do you explain that?" Olivia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I was in shock. I had just witnessed violence I'd never experienced before. My words came out wrong. But Mr. Hayes had just saved your life. I'm aware of that. And yet your first instinct was to... My first instinct was to maintain control in a situation where I had none. Olivia's voice sharpened. I'm not proud of what I said, but I also won't pretend that Daniel Hayes and I exist in the same world. He made a choice to intervene, a brave choice, but it wasn't his responsibility to save me. Daniel felt Emma tense beside him. She's still being mean, his daughter said. On screen, the interviewer pressed on. Some would say you owe him more than the statement your company released. I offered him compensation, which he refused. Something flickered across Olivia's face, surprise, confusion. It was gone too quickly to tell. That's his choice, she said, just as intervening was his choice. Ms. Grant, the public reaction has been severe. Your company's stock has dropped 12%. There are calls for your resignation. Do you think this response is fair? Fair. Olivia laughed, but there was no humor in it. Nothing about this situation is fair. It's not fair that 3 men decided to rob a bank. It's not fair that Mr. Hayes felt compelled to risk his life. It's not fair that my reaction in a moment of trauma is being used to define my entire character. So you're saying you're the victim here? I'm saying we're all victims of different things. Mr. Hayes is a victim of violence. I'm a victim of expectations that I should perform gratitude in a specific way to satisfy public bloodlust. Daniel turned off the TV. He'd heard enough. She's not very good at saying sorry, Emma observed. No, baby. She's not. The phone rang again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar when he answered. Mr. Hayes, this is Richard Thornton, Ms. Grant's attorney. If she wants to talk to me, she can call herself. She has. You haven't answered. Because I have nothing to say to her. There was a pause. Mr. Hayes, I'm calling in a personal capacity, not professional. What you did at that bank was extraordinary. What happened after was unfortunate. That's one word for it. She's not a bad person, Mr. Hayes. She's been taught her whole life that showing weakness, accepting help, owing anyone anything, these are all failures. What you did challenged everything she believes about herself. That's not my problem. No, it's not. But she's trying in her own way to make this right. By going on TV and basically saying I should have minded my own business. By telling the truth as she sees it. I know that's not the apology you deserve, but it might be the only one she's capable of giving. After Thornton hung up, Daniel sat in the quiet of his apartment, feeling the weight of everything settling on him. Outside, he could hear the reporters still lingering, their voices carrying up through the thin walls. Inside, Emma had fallen asleep against his good side, her breathing deep and even. Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen making something that smelled like comfort and care. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When he opened it, it was a photo of him carrying Emma on his shoulders at the beach last summer, both of them laughing. The message beneath read, "This is what a real hero looks like. Thank you for showing us." A grateful stranger. How had they gotten this photo? Daniel realized it must have been pulled from social media, from some distant acquaintance's page where he'd been tagged. His private life excavated and redistributed for public consumption. Another text, this one from Helen Morrison. Job offer still stands. Start whenever you're ready. No pressure. A knock at the door made him tense. Mrs. Chen looked through the peephole, then opened it to reveal not a reporter, but James, the young security guard from the bank. Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry to bother you. I wanted to give you this. He handed Daniel an envelope, then fled before Daniel could respond. Inside was a handwritten letter, Mr. Hayes. I took your advice and went to see Mrs. Morrison. She hired me on the spot, said anyone you vouched for was good enough for her. I wanted you to know that your kindness to me after I failed you so badly changed everything. My parents were going to kick me out for losing my job. Now I have a new one, a better one with people who understand that courage isn't just about the moment of crisis, but about what comes after. Thank you for seeing me as more than my worst moment. James. Daniel read the letter twice, feeling something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with his wounds. Who was that? Emma asked, stirring from her nap. Someone who needed help finding their way. Did you help them? I think maybe we helped each other. The afternoon brought more calls, more texts, more evidence that his story had become public property. The GoFundMe Tony had mentioned was now at $50,000, with messages from donors that ranged from supportive to angry to desperate for their own recognition. Hero, you showed those rich bastards what real Americans are made of. Mr. Hayes, your sacrifice reminds me of my father who died protecting others. Thank you for keeping his spirit alive. Why didn't you take the money? Are you stupid? I would have taken it, and more? Each message felt like another weight added to a burden he hadn't asked to carry. He was becoming a symbol, a screen onto which people projected their own struggles, resentments, hopes. But symbols didn't have to pick up their daughters from school or figure out how to pay rent or navigate the complex reality of being human in a world that wanted simple narratives. Emma had returned to her room to play, giving Daniel a moment alone with his thoughts. He pulled out the check Olivia had sent, $50,000 still folded in his wallet. It would solve so many problems. Emma could have new clothes that fit, could join the soccer team she'd been wanting to try, could have a college fund that consisted of more than good intentions. But cashing it felt like accepting her version of events that what had happened was a transaction. His blood for her money, everything reduced to its cash value. His phone rang. This time it was his supervisor from the construction site. Hayes, I hate to do this, but I got a call from corporate. They're concerned about liability, you working while injured. They want a full medical clearance before you can come back, and even then, the supervisor trailed off. They're firing me. They're calling it temporary leave without pay, but yeah, I'm sorry, Danny. I fought for you, but they're scared of lawsuits, bad publicity, the whole mess. Daniel hung up without saying goodbye. The construction job had never been much hard labor for modest pay, but it had been steady, reliable. Now even that was gone collateral damage from his moment of heroism. Mrs. Chen emerged from the kitchen with a plate of sandwiches, took one look at his face, and sat down beside him. More bad news. Lost my job. She made a clicking sound with her tongue that conveyed more than words could. You save people and the world punishes you. Maybe that's just how it works. No. Her voice was fierce. That's how we let it work. There's difference. Before he could respond, there was another knock at the door. This time it was several people neighbors Daniel barely knew by name, people he'd passed in the hallway for years without more than a nod. We wanted to check on you, said Marcus from 3B, a bus driver who worked nights, and to tell you those reporters better not stick around. This is a working neighborhood. We got no patience for parasites. You need anything, you ask, added Maria from down the hall, the one with 3 kids who always seemed to be rushing somewhere. Groceries, someone to watch Emma, whatever. They didn't stay long. These people who were strangers, but not quite who understood without explanation what it meant to live paycheck to paycheck, to have your body be your only capital, to make impossible choices daily between bad and worse. After they left, Daniel realized something had changed in the building, maybe in the neighborhood itself. His act of heroism. Olivia's rejection, the whole media circus, it had crystallized. Something made visible the usually invisible lines between those who had and those who served those who mattered and those who were machinery. Emma came out of her room carrying her tablet. Daddy, I want to show you something. She'd been on a kid's social media site, the kind with heavy parental controls and moderated content. Someone had posted a drawing of Daniel as a superhero cape and all. The comments below were from other kids. Your dad is the bravest. My mom says he's what a real hero looks like. Can he come to my school for show and tell? See? Emma said proudly. Everyone knows you're special. I'm not special, Sunshine. You are to me, she interrupted with the firm certainty that only children possessed. And that's what matters. The sun was setting, painting the apartment in warm golds that made everything look softer, more forgiving. Outside, the reporters had finally given up, driven away by the neighborhood's collective cold shoulder, or simply bored by the lack of drama. Daniel's phone rang one more time. He almost didn't answer, exhausted by the day's emotional battering, but something made him pick up. Mr. Hayes. The voice was familiar, but unexpected. Olivia Grant without lawyers or intermediaries. What do you want? To explain. To apologize, though I know you won't believe it. You're right, I won't. There was silence, then a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob.
Do you know what my father said when he heard about what happened? He said I'd finally found someone I couldn't buy or intimidate or manipulate. He said it like it was a bad thing. I don't care what your father. I've been raised to see every interaction as a transaction, Mr. Hayes. Every kindness as debt, every sacrifice as manipulation. When you saved me, my first thought wasn't gratitude. It was, what does he want? What will this cost me? Because in my world, everything costs something. In my world, too. Except we pay in different currencies. Yes. Her voice was quiet now. You pay in blood and sweat. I pay in, I don't even know anymore. Pride isolation. The inability to accept that someone like you could do something for someone like me without an angle. Everyone's got an angle. What was yours? Daniel thought about it, really thought about it for the first time. There wasn't one. That's what you can't understand. Sometimes people just do things because they're right, not because they'll get something out of it. That terrifies me more than the robbers did. Why? Because it means everything I've built my life on might be wrong. That the walls I've put up didn't protect me, they just made me less. Daniel didn't know what to say to that. Outside his window, he could see the lights of the city coming on, each one representing a life, a story, a struggle he'd never know. I watched your interview, he finally said. And you still don't get it. This isn't about you owing me or not owing me. It's about recognizing that the person who saved you is a human being, not just some construction worker who got in the way. Is that how you think I see you? I don't have to think it. You showed me. Another silence, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, younger, somehow uncertain. My mother left when I was 8. Just walked out, left me with my father and his money and his expectations. The only explanation she gave was that she couldn't breathe in our world, that the money was like a wall that kept everything real out. I promised myself I'd never be weak like her, never need anyone, never be vulnerable to that kind of abandonment again. And then I made you vulnerable by saving you. You made me realize I've been abandoned anyway, just by my own choice. The walls I built to keep pain out have kept everything out. Daniel could hear Emma in her room singing along to some cartoon theme song, oblivious to the adult drama playing out in the living room. Ms. Grant. Olivia, please. Olivia, I don't need your money. I don't need your apology. I just need you to understand that what happened in that bank, it wasn't about you or me or class or any of the things everyone's trying to make it about. It was just a moment when I could help, so I did. That's it. That's everything, she said softly. That's what I've never had the ability to just help without calculating the cost. You could learn. Could I? I'm 35 years old and I've never done a single thing that wasn't about advancing my position, protecting my interests, maintaining my image. I don't even know how to start being different. You start by seeing people, really seeing them, not as employees or obstacles or opportunities, but as people. Is that how you see me as a person? Daniel considered lying, giving her the absolution she seemed to be seeking, but she'd been right about one thing. They lived in different worlds, and in his world, comfortable lies were a luxury he couldn't afford. I see someone who's probably more trapped than I am. At least my struggles are honest. Yours are all in your head, and those are the hardest cages to escape. He heard her sharp intake of breath, wondered if he'd gone too far. But when she spoke, there was something like relief in her voice. No one's ever spoken to me like that. Even the people who hate me, they're still careful, still calculating what they can get or lose. That's because I've already lost everything I'm going to lose from this. Job's gone, privacy's gone, normal life's gone. What else can you or anyone take? Your daughter. How is she handling all this? The question surprised him with its apparent genuineness. She's 7. She thinks I'm a hero, and you're a mean lady who doesn't know how to say sorry. She's probably right on both counts. I'd like to meet her. No. I wasn't asking to meet her now. I mean, someday, when she's older, to explain, to apologize properly. To her, not the media, not the public. To the person who matters most to you. We'll see. That's more than I deserve. They sat in their respective silences, connected by phone lines and shared trauma, but separated by everything else.
Finally, Olivia spoke again. The check I sent. Will you cash it? No. The GoFundMe then. You'll accept that. I don't know, probably. It's different. Because it's from people like you. Because it's from people who understand what it costs to stand up when everyone else stays down. I want to contribute to it. Don't. It would change what it means.
Yeah, everything I do changes what things mean. That's part of my curse, Mr. Hayes. My money makes everything transactional even when I don't want it to be. Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Daddy, is it dinner time? I have to go, Daniel told Olivia. Of course, Mr. Hayes. Daniel, thank you. Not for saving me, although that too, but for this conversation. For treating me like a person capable of growth instead of a monster beyond redemption. Everyone's capable of growth. The question is whether they want it enough to change. Do you think I do? I think you called me yourself instead of having your lawyer do it. That's a start. After he hung up, Daniel focused on the immediate, the real, the manageable. Making dinner for Emma mac and cheese with cut-up hot dogs a feast in their small kingdom. Helping her with homework, her tongue poking out in concentration as she worked through basic multiplication. Bath time, story time, the ritual of normalcy that made life bearable. As he tucked her in, Emma grabbed his hand. Daddy, are you going to be okay? Of course, sunshine. Why do you ask? You look sad even when you're smiling. Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel thought. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings, baby. Happy and sad mixed together. Like when Mom left. The question hit him unexpectedly. Emma rarely mentioned Melissa anymore. Yeah, a little like that. But you stayed. I'll always stay, even if someone tries to hurt you again. Especially then. She seemed satisfied with this answer, settling into her pillow with the complete trust that only children could manage. Daniel stayed until her breathing deepened into sleep, watching her face in the nightlight's glow, seeing Melissa's features softened by his own creating something entirely unique and precious. Back in the living room, he sat in the dark, not bothering with lights.
His side ached, his shoulder throbbed, and his future was a black hole of uncertainty. But Emma was safe asleep in her bed with her penguin pajamas and her absolute faith that tomorrow would come and her father would be there to meet it. His phone lit up with another message. This time it was from Helen Morrison. Saw the news. Offer still stands. Start when you're ready. We take care of our own. Our own. The phrase resonated with something deep in Daniel's chest. Maybe that was what all this had really revealed, not the divide between rich and poor, though that was real enough, but the existence of another kind of wealth. The wealth of connection, of community, of people who saw you as more than your use value. He thought about Olivia Grant in what he imagined was a pristine penthouse somewhere, surrounded by luxury, but fundamentally alone, trying to understand why someone would bleed for a stranger. He thought about the robbers wherever they were, probably planning their next desperate grab at something they'd never really have. He thought about James starting over with a second chance he hadn't expected. He thought about all the invisible people in the city, the ones who cleaned the offices and fixed the pipes and raised the children and kept the world turning without recognition or reward. Tomorrow he would have to make decisions. Whether to take Helen's job offer, whether to accept the GoFundMe money, whether to try to return to some version of normal or accept that normal was gone forever. But tonight he sat in the dark with his wounds and his worries, knowing that in the end the only judgment that mattered was Emma's. And in her eyes, he was exactly what he'd always been, her father, her protector, her hero. Not because he'd saved a CEO who didn't want saving, not because strangers on the internet had opinions about his choices, but because tomorrow morning he would get up despite the pain and make her breakfast. He would walk her to school even if reporters followed. He would continue the quiet heroism of parenthood that no one filmed, no one celebrated, but that mattered more than all the rest. The city hummed outside his window, indifferent and eternal. Somewhere, Olivia Grant was learning what it meant to owe something that couldn't be repaid with money. Somewhere people were watching videos of his sacrifice and arguing about what it meant. But here in a small apartment with walls that needed painting and floors that creaked, Daniel Hayes sat with his truth. That sometimes you stand up not because you're brave or stupid or heroic, but because in that moment standing is the only thing that makes sense. Even if the person you stand for doesn't understand, even if it costs you everything, even if the only reward is knowing you are exactly who your daughter believes you to be. The darkness was complete now, but not oppressive. It felt like a blanket, like protection, like the space between one day and the next where anything could be possible. Daniel closed his eyes and let himself drift, not quite sleeping, but not quite awake, existing in that liminal space where heroes and ordinary men were the same thing, where sacrifice and stupidity were indistinguishable, where a construction worker's blood could stain marble floors and change nothing and everything all at once. The morning came too soon with Emma's small hand on his shoulder and worry in her voice. "Daddy, there's a lady at the door." Daniel jerked awake, his wounds protesting the sudden movement. Through the peephole, he saw not a reporter, but a woman in her 60s, professionally dressed, but with a warmth the corporate uniform couldn't hide. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Dorothy Chen from Child Services. I'm here for a welfare check." The words sent ice through his veins. He opened the door slowly, trying to project calm despite his racing heart. "May I come in?" "This is routine given the recent events and your injuries." Routine, as if anything about this situation was routine. Daniel stepped aside, acutely aware of the breakfast dishes in the sink, Emma's toys scattered across the living room floor, the general chaos of single parenthood. "Emma, why don't you go play in your room for a bit?" he said, keeping his voice light. "But I want to... Please, sunshine." She went, but not without shooting the social worker a suspicious look that would have been funny in different circumstances. Dorothy Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen from next door, despite the shared surname, surveyed the apartment with practiced eyes. "Mr. Hayes, I want to start by saying this isn't punitive. We received concerns about your ability to care for your daughter given your injuries. Concerns from who? I'm not at liberty to say, but given the media attention, it could have been anyone." She pulled out a tablet, began making notes. "How are you managing daily tasks?" "Cooking, cleaning, getting Emma to school." "I'm managing fine." "Are you Mr. Hayes? You were stabbed twice 3 days ago. You lost your job. You have no family support system according to our records." Each statement felt like an accusation, though her tone remained neutral. "I have neighbors who help. Mrs. Chen next door, she's like family. But not actual family. And elderly herself, according to our information." Daniel felt the walls closing in. After everything, was he going to lose Emma too? The thought made him dizzy with panic. "My daughter is safe, loved, and cared for. That's what matters." "Of course. But we have to consider the full picture. Your financial situation, for instance." "I have job prospects. Helen Morrison at Coral Gables Credit Union offered me a position." Dorothy made a note. "When would that start?" "As soon as I'm physically able." "Which, according to your medical records, could be weeks." She looked up from her tablet, and her professional mask slipped slightly. "Mr. Hayes, I'm not here to take your daughter, but I need to document that she's being properly cared for, that you have a plan." "My plan is the same as it's always been. Work hard, provide for my daughter, be there for her. Nothing about that has changed. Except your ability to work, your physical condition, the circus outside your door." Before Daniel could respond, Emma appeared in the doorway, her face set in determination. "My daddy is the best daddy in the world," she announced. "He makes sure I have lunch every day, even when he doesn't eat breakfast. He helps with my homework, even when he's tired. He reads me stories and checks for monsters, and never forgets to say he loves me." "Emma?" Daniel started, but she wasn't finished. And when those bad men tried to hurt people, he stopped them. Even though he got hurt, because that's what he does, he protects people. So you can't take me away from him. I won't let you. Dorothy Chen's expression softened. "I'm not trying to take you away, sweetheart. I just need to make sure you're okay." "I'm okay when I'm with my dad. I'm not okay when people try to separate us." The social worker was quiet for a moment, then closed her tablet. "Mr. Hayes, I'm going to recommend continued monitoring, but no immediate intervention. However, you need to formalize your support system. Document who helps with Emma when you can't. Show steady income within 30 days. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Good." She stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Mr. Hayes, what you did at that bank showed incredible character. But being a hero to strangers means nothing if you can't care for your own child. Don't let pride prevent you from accepting help. After she left, Daniel slumped against the door, the weight of this new threat crushing. Emma wrapped her arms around his waist, careful of his injuries. Are we in trouble, Daddy? No, baby, just some grown-up stuff to figure out. Is it because of the mean lady, the one you saved? It's because of a lot of things. Emma pulled back, looking up at him with eyes that held too much understanding for her age. We're going to be okay, right? We're going to be okay. But even as he said it, Daniel wondered if it was true. The GoFundMe money would help, but accepting it meant accepting a label, a story, a public identity he didn't want. The job at the credit union would be steadier than construction, but could he really work security, seeing potential threats in every customer, reliving that moment of violence daily? His phone rang. Tony's name on the screen. Danny, you see the news? I'm avoiding the news. They arrested one of them, one of the robbers, guy named Marcus Webb. And Danny, he's talking, saying things about why they did it, about knowing who would be there. What do you mean? I mean, maybe this wasn't as random as everyone thought. You might want to watch this. Against his better judgment, Daniel turned on the TV. A young man's face filled the screen, one of the robbers, barely 25, looking scared and defiant in his orange jumpsuit. Wasn't supposed to go down like that, Marcus Webb was saying to someone off camera. We knew she'd be there. Rich lady, regular appointment every Tuesday. Easy mark, easy ransom if things went bad. Nobody was supposed to get hurt. The reporter's voice. You're saying Olivia Grant was specifically targeted? Her and her money. Yeah, you know how much that woman's worth. How many people she stepped on to get there? We figured she owed us. Owed everybody. Daniel felt sick. It hadn't been random. Olivia had been hunted, targeted, and he'd stepped into the middle of something planned personal. His phone rang again. Olivia's number. Did you see? Her voice was different, shaken, vulnerable. Yeah. They came for me specifically, and you stepped in front of a knife meant for me specifically. Would it have mattered if I'd known? Would you still have done it? Daniel thought about it, really considered it. I don't know, maybe, probably. It wasn't really a choice, it was just reaction. They wanted to kidnap me, or kill me, and you prevented that. The police would have. The police arrived 12 minutes after they left. 12 minutes, Daniel. What do you think would have happened in 12 minutes? He didn't want to think about it. Didn't want to retroactively add weight to a split-second decision that already felt too heavy. There's something else, Olivia continued. Marcus Webb. I know him. Or knew him. His mother worked for my company. We laid her off 6 months ago. Budget cuts. Jesus. She'd been with us 15 years. Good employee by all accounts. But her salary was high for her position and the board wanted better margins. So this was revenge. This was desperation. His mother lost her health insurance when we let her go. She's sick, needs treatment they can't afford. He was trying to balance the scales, I suppose. Daniel didn't know what to say. The narrative was shifting, becoming more complex than hero and villain, more nuanced than rich and poor. It was becoming human, messy, tragic in ways that had nothing to do with heroism. I'm going to hire her back, Olivia said quietly. His mother, with full benefits, back pay, everything. That won't undo what happened. No, but maybe it's a start. Maybe it's what I should have done instead of cutting jobs to boost stock prices. Emma had turned the TV to cartoons, but Daniel could see her watching him, reading his face with the intuition children developed when they had only one parent to rely on. I need to go, he told Olivia. Daniel, wait. The social services visit. I heard about it. How did you? I have sources. I want to help. No. Please, let me do something useful for once. I can make calls, ensure they leave you alone. Using your influence to fix my problems doesn't make things right between us. Then what would? Daniel considered it. Nothing. Nothing would make it right because it doesn't need to be made right. We're two people whose lives intersected violently for a few minutes. That's all. You don't owe me anything, and I don't need anything from you. That's not true. I owe you my life. Then live it better. That's all anyone can do. He hung up before she could respond. Emma climbed onto his lap, careful of his injuries. Was that the mean lady? Yeah. Is she still mean? I think she's trying not to be. Good. People should try not to be mean. The simplicity of childhood morality where trying was enough, where good and bad were clear categories, where heroes saved people and villains hurt them, and everything made sense. Mrs. Chen knocked on the door, entering with a pot of soup and the kind of determined energy that had probably carried her through decades of hardship. I heard about the social services, she said without preamble. Ridiculous. You are good father, best father I know. They're just doing their job. Their job should be bothering bad parents, not heroes. I'm not a... You are hero to Emma. Emma, that's only kind that matters. She began unpacking containers from her bag. I talked to my nephew. He's lawyer. Not expensive kind, but good. He says you need documentation witnesses, character references. We get those. Mrs. Chen, I can't ask you to... You don't ask. I volunteer. This is what family does. We're not family. She fixed him with a look that could have melted steel. Daniel Hayes, you and Emma are more family to me than my own son in California who calls once a year. Family is not blood. Family is showing up. The afternoon brought more developments. The GoFundMe had reached $70,000. Comments poured in from strangers who saw themselves in Daniel's story. Single mom here. I know what it's like to choose between your safety and your kid's future. You chose both. Hero. Construction worker for 20 years. We build their world, and they don't even see us. Until one of us bleeds for them. Stay strong, brother. This isn't about him being a hero. This is about a system that makes heroism necessary and then punishes it. Helen Morrison called. Daniel, I know you need time to heal, but I want to make something clear. The job is yours whenever you're ready, part-time at first if needed. We'll work around Emma's schedule, your recovery, whatever you need. Why are you doing this? Because people like us need to stick together. Because you did something extraordinary and shouldn't be punished for it. Because I believe in investing in character, and you've shown more character in 3 days than most people show in a lifetime. I just did what anyone would do. No, Daniel, you did what anyone should do. There's a difference. After the call, Daniel found himself standing at Emma's doorway, watching her play with her worn dolls, creating elaborate stories where everyone was brave and kind and things worked out in the end. She'd incorporated the bank robbery into her play. He could hear her narrating how the brave daddy doll saved everyone, how even the mean lady doll learned to say thank you. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When he opened it, it was a photo of graffiti on a wall downtown, a rough but recognizable portrait of him with the words "working class hero" spray-painted beneath. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired, hurt, overwhelmed. But somewhere in the city, someone had taken the time to create art about what he'd done to make his moment of instinct into something larger, something that mattered to people he'd never meet. Another text, this from James. First day at the credit union went great. Mrs. Morrison says to tell you she's holding your spot. Also, local news wants to interview me about you. Should I do it? Daniel thought about it. The story was already out there, spinning beyond his control. Maybe having voices like James's people who understood the complexity would help. Your choice, he texted back. Just tell the truth. The truth is you saved everyone in that bank, then saved me after with your kindness. That's an exaggeration. That's an understatement. Evening brought another surprise. A knock at the door revealed not another reporter or social worker, but a group of people Daniel recognized from the bank. The elderly man who'd been making a deposit. The young teller who'd cried. 2 customers he'd never spoken to, but who'd been there, witnessed everything. We wanted to check on you, the elderly man said, and to say what Ms. Grant apparently couldn't thank you. They didn't stay long, these strangers bound by shared trauma. But each one shook his hand, looked him in the eye, offered something gratitude, a homemade casserole, a child's drawing of a superhero that looked suspiciously like Daniel. My grandson drew this, one woman explained. He was there with me. He's been having nightmares, but drawing you as a hero helps him process it. After they left, Daniel sat with Emma for dinner, the casserole from the bank customers. Bread from Mrs. Chen, a meal built from the kindness of others. Daddy, why do some people say thank you and others don't? I think some people don't know how. Maybe no one ever taught them. Could we teach them? Maybe, but some lessons people have to learn for themselves. Like when I had to learn to tie my shoes. You showed me, but I had to practice exactly like that. The phone rang again. This time it was a producer from a national morning show offering to fly him and Emma to New York, put them up in a hotel, have him tell his story to millions. We can offer an appearance fee of $10,000. The producer said, as if that sealed the deal. No, thank you. Mr. Hayes, this is an opportunity to control your narrative to... My narrative is that I'm a father who needs to heal and take care of his daughter. Everything else is noise. He hung up and found Emma watching him from the hallway. You said no to money, she observed. I did. But we need money. We need peace more. She considered this with the seriousness of a judge. Okay, but maybe a little money too. Maybe a little shiki, he agreed. Thinking of the GoFundMe of Helen's job offer of possibilities that didn't require selling his story to the highest bidder. As night fell, Daniel helped Emma with her homework, simple addition that she could do in her head, but needed to show her work for. He thought about showing your work about the visible and invisible labor of living, of choosing, of standing up, even when the world would rather you stayed down. Daddy, Emma said suddenly, I'm proud of you. For saving those people. No, for coming home. The words hit him unexpectedly, a reminder that for Emma, the heroism wasn't in the grand gesture, but in the return in the continuation of their small, precious life together. After she was asleep, Daniel stood on the small balcony off the living room, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Marcus Webb sat in a cell, paying for his desperation. Somewhere Olivia Grant wrestled with realizations about herself she'd probably rather avoid. Somewhere people watched videos of his sacrifice and projected their own meanings onto it. But here in this moment, Daniel Hayes was just a father, wounded but healing, struggling but surviving ordinary in all the ways that mattered, and extraordinary in ways he'd never asked to be. His phone lit up with one final message of the day. Olivia again. I've transferred ownership of several investment properties to a trust. The income will go to Marcus Webb's mother's medical expenses and to families affected by our layoffs. It's not enough, but it's a start. You asked me to live better. I'm trying. Thank you for showing me I needed to. Daniel didn't respond. There was nothing to say that hadn't been said, no words that could bridge the gulf between their worlds. But maybe bridges weren't always about words. Maybe sometimes they were about actions, about choices, about the slow work of becoming better than you were. Inside, he checked on Emma one more time, adjusting her blanket, moving a stuffed animal closer to her grasp. She stirred slightly, murmured "Daddy," and settled back into sleep. This was worth bleeding for, not the abstract idea of heroism, not the gratitude of strangers or the ingratitude of those saved, but this specific child in this specific moment, safe and dreaming and absolutely certain that her father would be there when she woke. The city hummed its nighttime song outside, a mixture of sirens and traffic and life persisting despite everything. Daniel's wounds ached, a reminder that heroism had a price that lasted longer than headlines. But Emma was safe. They had food and shelter and the possibility of tomorrow, and sometimes that was its own kind of victory. He thought about Marcus Webb's mother, sick and desperate enough that her son had turned to violence. He thought about all the invisible desperations that drove people to terrible choices, all the systemic failures that made heroes necessary and then abandoned them once the danger passed. Tomorrow he would need to make decisions about the money, the job, the future that seemed simultaneously more possible and more uncertain than ever. Tomorrow the media would move on to other stories, other heroes and villains, other simplifications of complex truths. Tomorrow Emma would need lunch made and homework checked, and the absolute certainty that her father wasn't going anywhere. But tonight, Daniel Hayes sat in the darkness of his small apartment, feeling the weight of his new unwanted fame. and the older, more familiar weight of single parenthood, and found them both bearable. Not easy, never easy, but bearable in the way that all necessary burdens became bearable through repetition, through acceptance, through the gradual realization that strength wasn't about not feeling the weight, but about carrying it anyway. His phone showed 3 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Reporters probably, or producers, or people who wanted to turn his blood into content, his sacrifice into entertainment. He deleted them without listening to the messages. Some stories weren't meant to be sold, some moments too precious or painful to be packaged for consumption. Instead, he pulled out the notebook where he kept important information. Emma's medical records, emergency contacts, the mundane documentation of a life lived carefully on the margins. He began writing a list, people who could help with Emma, evidence of his support system for the social worker's requirements. Mrs. Chen's name went first, then Helen Morrison, then surprisingly the neighbors who'd checked on him, the bank customers who'd brought food. Community. That's what he'd discovered in the aftermath of violence. Not the community of wealth or proximity, but the community of understanding of shared struggle of people who knew what it meant to show up, because showing up was all they had to offer. The list grew longer than he'd expected. For someone who'd thought himself alone except for Emma, the evidence suggested otherwise. Perhaps that was another form of heroism. The quiet kindness of ordinary people taking care of each other, unfilmed and uncelebrated, but essential to survival. A sound from Emma's room made him look up. Not distress, just the normal sounds of a child sleeping, repositioning, dreaming of whatever 7-year-olds dreamed of when their fathers had been stabbed saving strangers. He hoped it was still dinosaurs and penguins, not knives and marble floors. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. The social worker would want documentation. The medical bills would arrive despite insurance. The rent would be due. The city would continue its indifferent spin, and he would need to find his place in it again, changed by an experience he hadn't sought but couldn't undo. But Emma would wake up, and he would make her breakfast, and they would continue the beautiful, difficult, ordinary work of being a family. That was the real heroism, not the spectacular gesture, but the daily showing up, the small sacrifices that nobody saw, the love that persisted despite everything that tried to erode it. Daniel closed the notebook, turned off the lights, and made his way to his own bed. His wounds protested every movement, a symphony of pain that would be his companion for weeks to come. But pain could be endured, had been endured, would be endured. As sleep finally began to claim him, his last thought wasn't of Olivia Grant or the robbers or the media circus or the uncertain future. It was of Emma's face when she'd stood up to the social worker, fierce and protective and absolutely certain that her father was worth fighting for. That was the truth that mattered, not what the newspapers said or what strangers thought or what Olivia Grant did with her money and guilt. The truth was a 7-year-old girl who believed in him, who needed him, who made every sacrifice worthwhile simply by existing. Everything else was noise. The next morning brought an unexpected clarity to Daniel's situation when Helen Morrison arrived at his apartment unannounced, carrying a box of documents and wearing the expression of someone who'd made a decision. "We need to talk about your future," she said, settling at his kitchen table as if she belonged there. "And I mean really talk, not dance around your pride." Emma was at school, Mrs. Chen having taken her after fussing over Daniel's bandages and leaving fresh soup on the stove. The apartment felt strangely empty without his daughter's presence, as if her absence made the walls expand, showing just how much space their small life actually didn't fill. "The job at the credit union," Helen continued, spreading papers across the table. "It's more than just security work. I want you to head up our community outreach program." "I don't know anything about community outreach." "You know about community. You know about struggle. You know what it's like to be turned away by banks that see you as a number, not a person." She pushed a document toward him. "Starting salary of $52,000, health benefits that actually cover things. Flexible hours for Emma." $52,000. More than he'd ever made in construction, enough to maybe think about moving to a better school district, enough to stop the constant mental math of survival. "Why?" he asked. "Because what happened at that bank wasn't just about you being brave. It was about the collision of two worlds that usually pretend the other doesn't exist. You've become a symbol whether you wanted to or not. I'd rather have that symbol working to actually change things than just being a story people tell." Before he could respond, his phone rang. The display showed the hospital. Mr. Hayes, this is Dr. Patel. I need you to come in immediately. There's been a complication with your blood work. The world tilted. What kind of complication? I'd rather discuss it in person. How soon can you be here? Within an hour. Daniel sat in a sterile examination room trying to read Dr. Patel's expression as she reviewed his chart. Your blood tests show some anomalies, she began carefully. Specifically, markers that suggest your body is fighting something beyond the trauma from the stabbing. Cancer. The word came out strangled. We don't know yet. It could be an infection, could be your immune system overreacting to the trauma, could be something more serious. We need to run more tests. I have a daughter. I'm all she has. Which is why we're going to figure this out. But Mr. Hayes, this kind of stress you've been under, the physical trauma, combined with what I imagine is significant emotional strain, your body is telling us something's wrong. The test took 3 hours. 3 hours of needles and scans, and trying not to think about Emma becoming an orphan. Daniel called Mrs. Chen, asked her to pick Emma up from school, told her he was at a job interview. The lie tasted bitter, but necessary. In the waiting room afterward, he saw a familiar face on the television. Marcus Webb again, but this time with someone else, his mother frail and hollow-eyed in a wheelchair beside her son's attorney. My boy made a terrible mistake, she was saying to the cameras. But he did it for me, because the system failed us. Because when you take away someone's ability to survive legally, they'll find other ways. The reporter asked, do you think what your son did was justified? Nothing justifies violence, Mrs. Webb replied. But desperation makes people into versions of themselves they don't recognize. My son was trying to save my life the only way he could see. It was wrong, but it came from love. Daniel thought about love and desperation, about the thin line between heroism and crime, about how circumstances could push anyone past their breaking point. If Emma were sick, if he had no options, what would he do? The uncomfortable truth was, he didn't know, and that uncertainty sat heavy in his chest alongside the fear of his test results. His phone buzzed with a text from Olivia, saw you at the hospital. Are you okay? He looked around, didn't see her, then noticed a figure in a car across the parking lot. She was watching, waiting. Part of him wanted to ignore her, but something made him walk over. She rolled down the window. Up close, without the perfect lighting of television interviews, she looked exhausted human in a way she hadn't seemed before. Following me now? He asked. I was here for a board meeting. Hospital's a major donor. I saw you and... She shrugged, a gesture that seemed foreign to her usual composure. Are you okay? Maybe. Maybe not. Waiting on test results. Her face went pale. Is it from the stabbing? Did I? It's not your fault. Whatever it is, it's not your fault. Everything feels like my fault lately. She gripped the steering wheel tighter. Marcus Webb's mother, I remembered her after the arrest. Good employee. Always on time. Never complained. We let her go because an algorithm said she was replaceable. Algorithms don't make decisions. People do. I made that decision. Signed off on it with 100 others, never thinking about the faces behind the numbers. She looked at him directly. I've been thinking about what you said, about seeing people, really seeing them. It's terrifying. Why? Because once you see them, you can't unsee them. Every decision becomes personal. Every cut, every layoff, every margin improvement has a face, a story, a daughter waiting at home. Daniel leaned against her car, his side protesting. Welcome to how the rest of us live. I don't know how you do it. We don't have a choice. That's the difference between your world and mine. You can choose not to see. We're always visible to each other because we need each other to survive. Olivia was quiet for a moment, then reached into her purse, pulling out an envelope. Don't say no yet. Just listen. This isn't charity. It's not guilt money. It's an investment proposal. I told you I don't want a community development fund managed by people who understand what community actually needs. Small business loans for people banks won't touch. Emergency medical funds for families like the Webbs. You'd be on the board, help decide where the money goes. Why would I? Because you're right that I can't just throw money at problems. but maybe money directed by people who understand the problems could actually help. Daniel took the envelope but didn't open it. And what do you get out of it? Maybe I learn how to be human again. Maybe I remember why I started in business in the first place before it became about stock prices and quarterly reports. His phone rang. Dr. Patel. Mr.
Hayes, I have your results. It's not what we feared. You have a severe infection likely from bacteria introduced during the stabbing. It's serious but treatable with aggressive antibiotics. You're going to be fine. The relief nearly dropped him to his knees. Olivia got out of her car, steadying him. Good news, she asked. Not cancer, just an infection. I'm going to be fine. Thank God. The emotion in her voice surprised them both. Your daughter needs you. Yeah, she does. They stood there in the hospital parking lot, two people from different worlds brought together by violence and kept in orbit by something harder to define. Not friendship exactly, not forgiveness. Maybe just recognition of each other's humanity, of the ways they'd both been shaped and scarred by the systems they lived in. Read the proposal, Olivia said, getting back in her car. Talk to Helen Morrison about it. She's already agreed to have the credit union administer the funds if you say yes. You talked to Helen. I talk to a lot of people now. Amazing what you learn when you actually listen. After she drove away, Daniel stood in the parking lot holding the envelope, feeling the weight of possibilities he hadn't expected. His phone rang again. Mrs. Chen. Emma asking when you come home. She knows something wrong. I'm on my way. Everything's fine. You sure? Yeah, I'm sure. But on the drive home, Daniel felt anything but sure. The infection diagnosis was a relief, but it was also a reminder of his vulnerability, of how quickly everything could change. The job offer from Helen, the investment proposal from Olivia, the ongoing media attention, it all felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, unable to see the bottom, but knowing he had to jump. Emma was doing homework at the kitchen table when he arrived, but she abandoned it immediately, running to him. Mrs. Chen said you had a job interview. Did you get it? I think so, sunshine. But I haven't decided if I'll take it. Is it a good job? It might be. She studied his face with that uncanny perception children sometimes had. You look scared. Maybe a little. It's okay to be scared. You told me that, as long as you do the right thing anyway. And what's the right thing? Emma considered this seriously. The thing that helps the most people, including us. Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel thought again. He sat down at the table, opened Olivia's envelope. The proposal was more comprehensive than he'd expected. Not just money, but structure, accountability, a real attempt at systematic change. The fund would start with $10 million, with more to come based on results. Board positions would be paid, not symbolic. Community members would have real power over decisions. What's that? Emma asked, trying to read upside down. Maybe a chance to help people. Like you helped people at the bank. Different, slower, but maybe more lasting. Mrs. Chen, who'd been quietly cooking, spoke up. Change that lasts takes time. Quick change is just drama. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Daniel called Helen Morrison. I was wondering when you'd call, she said. I assume you've read Olivia's proposal. You really think this could work? I think someone like you who understands both the problems and the people could make it work. Combined with the job at the credit union, you'd be positioned to create real change. I'm a construction worker with a high school diploma. You're a man who stood between violence and victims when everyone else stayed down. That carries more weight than any degree. The media attention will die down. People will forget. Some will. But the structures we build while people are paying attention, those can last. The question is whether you're willing to use this moment, however uncomfortable it is, to build something meaningful. Daniel thought about the weight of symbolism of being turned into something larger than himself. But then he thought about Marcus Webb's mother, about all the desperate people making desperate choices, about Emma growing up in a world that might be slightly better if he said yes. Can I think about it? Take your time, but not too much time. Momentum matters in these things. After the call, Daniel sat in the dark living room, listening to the sounds of the city through thin walls.
Somewhere out there, 3 robbers had made choices that changed lives. Somewhere, Olivia Grant was learning what it meant to see people she'd trained herself to overlook. Somewhere, families were struggling with the same impossible math he knew so well. His phone lit up with a message from James. Did my interview today. Told them you saved my life twice, once at the bank and once after. Hope that was okay. Then another from Tony. Crew wanted you to know we're proud of you, whatever you decide about the job. And another from a number he didn't recognize, Mr. Hayes. You don't know me, but I was at the bank. The teller who was crying. You gave me strength to go back to work, to not let fear win. Thank you. Each message was a thread in something larger, a web of connection that hadn't existed before that moment of violence. Daniel hadn't asked for any of it, but here it was, community forming around trauma, purpose, emerging from pain. He pulled out his laptop, started researching. Community development, financial literacy. The statistics were staggering, the percentage of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, the number of families one medical emergency away from bankruptcy, the cycles of poverty that seemed designed to be inescapable. But there were also success stories, programs that worked, small interventions that created ripple effects. The possibility of change that wasn't dramatic, but was real. A knock at the door interrupted his research. He looked through the peephole, surprised to see Tony and 3 other guys from the construction crew. We know it's late, Tony said when Daniel opened the door, but we needed to tell you something. They filed in uncomfortable in the small space, men more used to open air and steel beams than apartment living rooms. We took a vote, Tony continued, the crew, about whether you should take the credit union job. That's my decision to make. Sure is, but we wanted you to know that whatever guilt you're feeling about leaving construction, about leaving us, don't. You've got a chance to do something bigger. Take it. Luis, who rarely spoke, added, my son, the one who got into college. He wrote his essay about you, about how someone from our neighborhood became a hero, not by becoming something else, but by being exactly who he always was. Just think about it, Tony said. You could help a lot of people from that credit union job, maybe help some of them avoid needing to work themselves to death on construction sites. After they left, Daniel found himself overwhelmed by the support he hadn't expected. These men who had their own struggles, their own families to worry about, taking time to encourage him towards something better. Emma appeared in the hallway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. I heard voices. Just some friends from work. Are they why you look happy? Happy Satasio, like when you watch me at school plays. Happy, I'm doing good, but sad about something else. Daniel pulled her into his lap, ignoring the protest from his injuries. Yeah, baby, happy sad is about right. Is it about the job? The helping people one? Yeah. I think you should do it. Why? Because you're good at helping people, and if you're good at something, you should do it lots. The next morning, Daniel made 2 calls. First to Helen Morrison, accepting the job at the credit union. Second to Olivia Grant, agreeing to join the Community Development Fund Board. There are conditions, he told Olivia. I expected there would be. The fund needs to be transparent, every decision public, and the board needs to be majority people from affected communities, not business leaders who think they know what's best. Agreed. And you don't get to use this for publicity. No press releases about how you're giving back. This isn't about rehabilitating your image. What if it's about rehabilitating my soul? That's between you and whatever you believe in. I'm starting to believe in second chances, Olivia said quietly, in the possibility of becoming better than we were. Everyone deserves that possibility, even CEOs who don't know how to say thank you. I am sorry, Daniel, for what I said, for how I reacted, for the person I'd become without realizing it. I know. Do you forgive me? Daniel thought about forgiveness, about what it meant and what it cost. I'm working on it. Maybe that's enough for now. The media attention continued, but was evolving. The story was no longer just about the bank robbery, but about what came after the community fund, the credit union initiative, the possibility of systematic change born from individual crisis. A week later, Daniel returned to the hospital for his follow-up, the antibiotics having done their work. Dr. Patel cleared him for light duty, warning him again about pushing too hard too fast. On his way out, he passed the chapel and on impulse went in. It was empty quiet in the way that invited reflection. Daniel wasn't particularly religious, but there was something about the space that felt necessary. He thought about his father, who'd died believing that hard work and honesty would be enough, about his mother who'd faced cancer with grace, even as it consumed her, about the examples they'd set and how he was trying to live up to them in a world that seemed designed to punish such values. "You did good," a voice said behind him. He turned to find an elderly woman in a hospital gown ivory stand beside her. "Excuse me." "At the bank. You did good. My grandson was there, saw the whole thing. He's been different since then, better different. Says if a regular man can be a hero, maybe he can too." "I'm not a hero." "Maybe not, but you stood up when everyone else stayed down. That's got to count for something." She shuffled away, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts. He pulled out his phone, looked at the photo Emma had taken that morning, the two of them at breakfast. Her smiling with gap teeth, him looking tired but present. This was what mattered. Everything else was just noise and necessity. His phone buzzed with a text from Helen. "First day is Monday. We're having a community meeting that evening. Would mean a lot if you spoke." "About what?" "About seeing each other. About how community means taking care of each other. About the difference between charity and solidarity." "I'm not a public speaker." "You're someone who bled for strangers. That gives you the right to speak about community." Monday came faster than expected. Daniel stood in his bedroom looking at clothes that all seemed wrong for an office job. Construction gear was all he'd worn for years, the uniform of his class and calling. Emma watched from the doorway. "Wear the blue shirt. It makes your eyes look nice." "Since when do you care about fashion?" "Since you got a job where people wear nice clothes." The blue shirt had been his father's, saved from the estate sale more for sentiment than style. But it fit, and when Daniel looked in the mirror, he saw something of his father's dignity reflected back. The credit union was smaller than the bank, where everything had changed, more intimate, more worn. The faces were different, too. Tired but hopeful. Struggling but striving. These were his people, and for the first time since the stabbing, Daniel felt like he might belong somewhere. Helen introduced him to the staff, a mix of ages and backgrounds, united by the belief that banking could be about more than profit. James was there looking professional in his security uniform, his face lighting up when he saw Daniel. "This is going to be good," James said. "We're going to help people. That's the plan." The day passed in a blur of paperwork and orientation, learning systems and procedures that seemed both simpler and more complex than construction work. But throughout it all, Daniel felt the weight of possibility of being positioned to create change rather than just survive it. The community meeting that evening was packed. Word had spread about the new initiative, about the famous hero working at the credit union, about the possibility of financial services that actually served. Daniel stood at the podium looking out at faces that reminded him of his own reflection, weathered by work marked by struggle, lit with cautious hope. "I'm not good at speeches," he began, his voice carrying despite his nerves. "I'm better with my hands than words. But I want to tell you something about what I learned at that bank bleeding on marble floors I'd never have walked on by choice." The room was silent, attentive in a way that felt heavy with expectation. "I learned that there are two worlds in this city. One where people make decisions with algorithms and spreadsheets where human cost is an externality. Another where people make impossible choices between food and medicine where one missed paycheck means catastrophe." He saw heads nodding recognition in eyes that had seen too much. "But I also learned that when crisis comes, those divisions can crack. People can see each other, really see each other across the walls we've built. And in that seeing, there's possibility." Daniel talked about the community fund, about the credit union's new programs, about the chance to build something that served rather than extracted. He talked about Marcus Webb's mother and all the others pushed past breaking points by systems that didn't see them as human. "We're not going to fix everything," he concluded, "but we can fix some things. We can be the alternative, the place that sees you as more than a credit score, that understands that poverty isn't a moral failing, but often a systemic trap." The applause was warm, genuine, but Daniel barely heard it. He was thinking about Emma in the front row, watching him with pride that made everything else fade. This was why he'd said yes, not for abstract ideals, but for the specific hope that his daughter could grow up in a slightly better world. After the meeting, people approached him with stories, questions, needs that broke his heart with their familiarity. Single mothers like him, construction workers with broken bodies, elderly people choosing between medication and food. Each story was unique, but part of a larger pattern, a systemic failure that individual heroism couldn't fix, but maybe, just maybe, collective action could address. Olivia was there in the back, having slipped in quietly. She approached as the crowd thinned. "That was powerful," she said. It was true. Sometimes those are the same thing. She looked around the room at the community that had gathered. This is what I missed sitting in boardrooms, the actual people affected by our decisions. It's not too late to learn. No, she agreed. It's not. As they walked out together, the CEO and the construction worker, the saved and the savior Daniel, realized the lines between them had blurred, not erased, never fully erased, but blurred enough to allow for something new. Not friendship exactly, but partnership in the work of repair. Emma took his hand as they left, skipping slightly despite the late hour. "You did good, Daddy." "Yeah. Yeah. You used your words instead of your fists. That's what you always tell me is the grown-up way. Sometimes words can change more than fists ever could. Is that why that lady was there? Is she changing?" Daniel looked back at Olivia getting into her expensive car, heading back to her penthouse in a different world. But tomorrow she'd be at the fun meeting, sitting across from people she'd once have stepped over on the street, learning to see them as human. "Maybe," he told Emma. "People are complicated, but I think she's trying. Good. Everyone should get to try to be better." As they drove home through streets that held both danger and community poverty and resilience, Daniel thought about second chances, about the grace required to offer them and the courage required to take them, about how a moment of violence had created possibilities for healing that hadn't existed before. The radio was playing news about the bank robbery trial starting soon. Marcus Webb faced 20 years. His mother had started treatment funded by Olivia's restructured priorities. The other robbers remained at large. The security guard who'd been shot was recovering. Life went on in all its messy complexity, refusing to be reduced to simple narratives of heroes and villains. But in the car with his daughter driving toward their small apartment that now felt less like a trap and more like a starting point, Daniel Hayes allowed himself a moment of something like peace. Not happiness exactly, his wound still ached. The future was still uncertain, the weight of symbolism still sat heavy on his shoulders. But peace in knowing he'd stood up when it mattered, and more importantly, that he was still standing after. "Daddy," Emma said sleepily, "are we going to be okay?" "Yeah, sunshine. We're going to be okay." And for the first time since a knife had entered his body in a bank, he'd had no business being in trying to cash a check that barely covered their needs. Daniel believed it might actually be true. Not because of the job or the fund or the fleeting fame, but because they'd survived the worst and found community in the aftermath. Because sometimes that's what heroism really looked like. Not the dramatic gesture, but the daily choice to keep going. Keep helping, keep believing that better was possible, even when evidence suggested otherwise. The city lights blurred past the window as Emma fell asleep against his shoulder, trusting completely that wherever they were going, her father would make sure they arrived safely. And Daniel, wounded but healing, exhausted but determined, drove on through the darkness toward whatever came next, knowing that he'd face it standing even if he needed others to help hold him up.